Can I tell you something that might sound completely backwards at first? The very thing you're convinced will scare him off is often the exact thing that finally gets an avoidant man to lower his defenses. And in the next few minutes, I want to walk you through exactly what that thing is, because once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. So many women spend weeks, sometimes months, trying to crack the code of why he keeps pulling back. You're doing everything you've read you're supposed to do. You're being patient. You're giving him room to breathe. You're careful not to come across as needy. And still, somehow, he stays just out of reach. He's close enough to keep you interested, but far enough that you never quite feel secure. It's maddening, isn't it? But here's something that might change how you see this whole situation. What if the answer isn't more space at all? What if space was never really the thing he needed in the first place? Avoidant men aren't actually looking for distance for its own sake. They're looking for something else entirely, something most people misread as a desire to be left alone. Once you understand what that something is, the way he pulls away will never look the same to you again. Before we go any further, though, I want you to do one small thing. If you're genuinely here because you want to understand this, drop the word "ready" in the comments. And if this is resonating with you, take a second to hit subscribe. We're trying to reach 2,000 subscribers, and honestly, we're still a good distance away. Every bit of support from people like you actually makes a real difference in keeping this content going. Okay, with that said, let's get into it. Let's start by talking about what's actually happening inside the mind of an avoidant man, because most people get this part wrong from the start. When he avoids you, it is not because he doesn't care about you. That needs to be the very first thing you let go of believing. His pulling away was never really about you to begin with. It's about him. It's about years, sometimes a lifetime, of learning to protect himself from feeling too deeply, from needing another person too much, from ever being caught in a moment of real vulnerability. Somewhere earlier in his life, needing someone else didn't feel safe. Maybe that unsafety was emotional, maybe it was something more physical. Either way, his nervous system absorbed a lesson early on. Closeness is dangerous. Getting close to someone means eventually getting hurt by them. And so, like anyone trying to survive, he adapted. He built walls, brick by brick. And for years, those walls did exactly what they were built to do. They kept him safe. They kept the pain out. And then you showed up. You're kind. You're affectionate. You bring warmth into the room just by being in it. In a lot of ways, you're everything he didn't even realize he'd been hoping for. And that is precisely what terrifies him. Because now, for the first time in a long while, there's something on the line. There's someone who actually has the power to hurt him if it goes wrong. So his instinct kicks in hard. He starts to retreat, not because he wants to lose you, but because some old part of him is trying to get out before things get too real, before he needs you too much, before you're in a position to break his heart. Most women, when they run into this wall, react in one of two ways. Either they push harder, doubling down to prove how committed and loving they are, or they retreat so far into giving him space that they practically vanish from the relationship altogether. Both feel like reasonable responses in the moment. Both seem logical on paper. But here's the catch with each one. When you chase him, even with the best intentions, you unintentionally confirm the exact fear that's driving his avoidance. He starts to believe that letting you in means losing himself completely, that closeness will swallow him whole. And on the other end, when you disappear entirely, hoping that giving him enough space will fix things, you accidentally trigger the deeper wound underneath his avoidance, the fear of abandonment. Now you've become, in his mind, just another person who left, exactly the outcome he always feared would happen. So then, what actually works? What's the one shift that changes the whole dynamic? It comes down to this. You stay, but you stay whole. You don't chase him down, but you also don't abandon your own needs and sense of self in the process. You remain present in the relationship without turning him into your entire world. You show up consistently without demanding that he match your pace, step for step. You're warm toward him without slipping into desperation. You're available to him without living your life on standby, waiting for his call. Let me paint a clearer picture of what this actually looks like in real life. When he starts to pull back, you don't panic. You don't fire off a string of long messages asking what went wrong or what you did. You don't manufacture drama just to pull his attention back to you. But at the same time, You're not playing games either. You're not giving him the cold shoulder to teach him some kind of lesson. You're not pretending indifference you don't actually feel. Instead, you simply keep living. You go have dinner with your friends. You keep working on the things that matter to you. You still make time for the hobbies and passions that light you up. You stay rooted in your own life, in your own fullness. And then, when he does reach back out, you meet him with warmth. You're genuinely glad to hear from him, but you're not falling apart with relief, and you're not acting as though his attention is the only thing keeping you afloat. This shift does something powerful to an avoidant man, something most people never realize is possible. It shows him, through action rather than words, that closeness doesn't have to mean losing himself. It teaches him that he can take the space he needs and still have you there on the other side of it. It proves to him that you won't crumble just because he needs a moment to breathe. And maybe most importantly, it models something he may have never actually witnessed before, what a genuinely healthy relationship looks and feels like. See, most avoidant men never had this modeled for them growing up. A lot of them came from homes where love came with conditions attached, where affection was tied to strings, where closeness often meant being controlled rather than cared for. So when you show up in a completely different way, offering connection without trying to control or possess him, it starts to rewrite what he thought was even possible between two people. But here's the part that really matters. You cannot fake this. You can't pretend everything's fine on the outside while you're quietly falling apart on the inside. You can't act unbothered while you're refreshing your phone every 30 seconds hoping he's texted. He will pick up on it. Avoidant men tend to be remarkably sensitive to anything that isn't fully genuine. They can sense neediness almost instinctively, mostly because they've spent so much of their own lives trying to avoid ever needing anyone that much themselves. So this isn't some clever tactic you're performing to manipulate an outcome. It's not a script you're following to trick him into staying. It's a real internal shift in how you're showing up in your own life. It's about actually building something fulfilling of your own, instead of sitting around waiting for him to be the one who completes you. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, this sounds a lot like settling, like I'm telling you to accept whatever small crumbs of affection he decides to offer you. But that couldn't be further from what I actually mean. In fact, it's the opposite. When you're genuinely full in your own life, you naturally stop putting up with poor treatment, because you're not desperate for his attention in the first place. You're not willing to take whatever scraps come your way. You hold on to your standards. You maintain real boundaries. And if those boundaries aren't respected, you're willing to walk away, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And you're doing all of this from a grounded, whole place, not as some hidden strategy to manipulate him into changing his behavior. Here's what tends to unfold when you actually live this out. First, he notices. He picks up on the fact that you've stopped chasing him. He notices you're not anxious around him anymore, that you genuinely seem okay whether he's around or not. And this throws him off a little because in his past experiences, when he's pulled away, people have always either chased after him or given up and left entirely. But you're doing neither. You're simply existing, fully and calmly, in your own life. And that becomes intriguing to him. It makes him curious. He starts wondering what you're up to, who you're spending time with, why you seem so at peace. Second, he starts to feel safe, and this is really the core of the whole thing. For maybe the first time, he begins to experience what it feels like to have space without losing the relationship entirely, to be himself without being punished for needing room to breathe, to realize that his need for independence doesn't send you spiraling. And safety, more than anything else, is what an avoidant man is actually craving underneath all of it. Not more pressure, not more intensity, not grand romantic gestures, just steady, dependable safety. Third, and this part takes patience, he begins to lean in slowly. Don't expect some dramatic overnight transformation where he suddenly becomes the most emotionally open person you've ever met. That's not how this works. What you'll notice instead are small, quiet shifts. He starts texting a bit more often. He starts making plans further out instead of staying vague about the future. He opens up little by little, sharing more of who he actually is. He lets you in gradually, at his own pace. And this slow pace is actually a good sign because real, lasting change happens gradually. If someone flips completely overnight, it's usually not genuine transformation. it's more likely a fear reaction to the possibility of losing you. But when the change unfolds slowly and steadily, that's usually a sign it's real. That's him actually working through and rewiring old attachment patterns. Now, I want to be really honest with you about something important. This approach can work, but it doesn't work with every single man, and it definitely doesn't mean you should sit around waiting indefinitely. Some men are so deeply entrenched in avoidance that they simply aren't capable of showing up for a real relationship right now, and in some cases, maybe not ever. You need to be honest with yourself about whether you're dealing with someone who is cautious versus someone who is genuinely emotionally unavailable. There's a real difference between the two. A cautious man will show you, over time, that he's actually trying. He'll move toward you, even if it's at a slower pace than you'd like. An emotionally unavailable man, on the other hand, will keep you frozen in the exact same place indefinitely. He'll offer just enough to keep you hanging on, but never quite enough to actually build something substantial and lasting. So how do you tell the two apart? You pay attention to his actions over an extended period of time, not over the course of a single week, and not even over the course of 1 month, but across several months. Ask yourself, is there real, visible progress, even if it's small? Is he noticeably more open now compared to 6 months ago? Is he putting in more effort? Is he showing up with more consistency than before? If the answer is yes, you're likely dealing with someone genuinely capable of growth. But if the answer is no, if you find yourself standing in the exact same spot you were a year ago, it's worth asking yourself honestly why you're still there. And this is where your own attachment patterns come into the picture too. It's a fairly common dynamic that anxiously attached women often find themselves drawn to avoidant men. It functions almost like a magnet. Your anxiety pulls at his avoidance stirs up your anxiety, and the two of you end up locked in a cycle where neither person ever quite feels secure or settled. So part of staying full isn't only about learning to navigate his avoidance. It's also about doing the work to heal your own anxiety. It's about getting curious and honest with yourself about why you keep being drawn to emotionally unavailable men in the first place. Why are you willing to put in so much effort for so little in return? What old wound inside you is quietly hoping to be healed through this particular relationship? Because here's the truth. When you've actually done that healing work, when you're truly whole within yourself, you generally stop being drawn to avoidant men altogether. And if you still are, you're no longer willing to tolerate their avoidance the way you once did. You can see it clearly for what it is. You can even hold compassion for where it comes from, but you no longer make it your personal responsibility to fix. You stop staying in relationships that consistently fail to meet your needs. You stop telling yourself that if you just love someone hard enough, they'll eventually change for you. You know your own worth, and you make your choices from that place. So let's break down what actually staying full requires in practice. First, it requires having a real life outside of him, genuine hobbies, real friendships you actually invest in, meaningful goals you're working toward, not activities you're using to kill time until he finally texts back, and not interests you abandon the second he becomes available. These need to be authentic parts of your life that genuinely light you up, that make you feel alive, and that remind you exactly who you are, independent of any relationship. Second, it requires you to stop making him the sole source of your happiness. This one is huge, and it's worth sitting with. When you're operating from anxiety, there's a tendency to outsource your emotional well-being onto other people entirely. You feel wonderful when he's attentive and engaged, and then you feel awful the moment he pulls back or goes quiet. Your entire mood becomes tethered to his behavior, and that pattern is exhausting, not just for you, but for him as well. Instead, the goal is to build your own internal stability, the ability to regulate your own emotions, to comfort yourself when anxiety creeps in, and to create your own sense of joy that doesn't depend on someone else's actions. Third, it requires becoming comfortable with uncertainty. Anxious people tend to deeply dislike uncertainty. You want to know exactly where you stand, where things are heading, what he's actually feeling about you. And honestly, that desire makes complete sense. But relationships, particularly in their earlier stages, are naturally full of unknowns. And if you're unable to sit with that uncertainty without spiraling into anxiety, you risk either pushing him further away or losing yourself trying to control an outcome that was never fully yours to control in the first place. So part of staying full means learning to be okay with not having all the answers right away, trusting that things will unfold the way they're meant to, and believing that if it's meant to work, it will, and if it isn't, something better is still ahead of you. Now let's talk about communication, because staying full doesn't mean you never voice your needs or feelings. It doesn't mean turning into someone who never asks for anything at all. That's really just another quiet form of abandoning yourself. Healthy relationships still require real honest communication, but there's a meaningful difference between the kind of communication that invites connection and the kind that triggers avoidance. When you're speaking from a place of anxiety, your words tend to come out sounding demanding, critical, or accusatory, even if that's not your intention. You might find yourself saying things like, "Why don't you ever text me back?" Or, "You always pull away right when things start getting good." Or, "I need to know right now where this is actually going." These statements, even though they come from real and valid needs, often land as attacks. And when an avoidant man feels attacked or cornered, his instinct is to shut down and withdraw, which ends up confirming the very fear you were trying to avoid in the first place. Instead, try shifting your communication to come from a grounded, calm place. You might say something like, "I've noticed we haven't connected as much lately, and I miss that. Is everything okay with you?" Or, "I'm someone who feels most secure with consistent communication. Is that something you're able to offer me?" Or, "I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and I'm genuinely interested in building something real with you. Do you feel the same way?" Notice how different that feels. You're still being completely honest. You're still voicing your actual needs, but you're expressing them calmly, without accusation, in a way that leaves him room to respond rather than backing him into a corner. And here's something important to hold on to. If you communicate your needs clearly and kindly, and he still isn't able to meet them, that tells you everything you actually need to know. It's not because you weren't patient enough. It's not because you somehow did it wrong. It simply means he's not currently capable of giving you what you need, and that, as hard as it is to hear, is genuinely valuable information. I want to share something honest with you here. A relationship that's actually right for you shouldn't feel this exhausting. Yes, every relationship takes effort. Yes, understanding each other's attachment styles and communicating well takes intention and work. But you shouldn't constantly feel like you're walking on eggshells, like one wrong move might send him running for the hills, like you have to be perfect just to earn basic love and consistency. If that's genuinely how you feel most of the time, you're not really in a relationship anymore. You're caught in an anxiety spiral, and you deserve so much more than that. An avoidant man who's genuinely ready for a real relationship will do his own inner work. He'll recognize his own patterns. He'll push through the discomfort that comes with vulnerability. He'll choose connection even when it feels frightening to do so. But that work is his to do, not yours. You cannot love someone into healing. You cannot be so perfect or so patient that he suddenly feels completely safe. His healing has to be his own responsibility to carry. Your responsibility is to show up as the healthiest version of yourself, to be clear about what you need, and to be willing to walk away if those needs consistently go unmet. So, what does it actually look like when this whole approach genuinely starts working, when you stay full and he slowly starts to soften and open up? It looks like slow, steady, believable progress. It looks like him starting to initiate contact more often, opening up more of himself to you, planning things further ahead, gradually bringing you deeper into his actual life. It looks like him saying things like, "I know I'm not always great at this, but I really am trying," or "Thank you for being patient with me through this," or even something like, "I don't think I've ever felt this safe with someone before." It might look like him actively doing his own work too, whether that's going to therapy, reading up on attachment theory, or having honest, vulnerable conversations with you about his fears. And it looks like you feeling more genuinely secure too, not because he's suddenly become flawless, but because you're witnessing real effort, real change, and real movement in your direction. You start to feel less anxious because his actions are actually lining up with his words, because he's showing consistency. because he's showing up not perfectly, but authentically and reliably. And really, that's what you've actually been hoping for the whole time. Not perfection, just real, genuine effort, just someone who's willing to meet you somewhere in the middle. But here's the thing you have to remember through all of this. This only works if you're actually, genuinely full. If you're truly living a rich, fulfilling life of your own, if you've truly stopped making him the center of your entire world, because the moment you slip back into old anxious patterns, the moment you start chasing again, the whole process resets itself. He feels the sudden pressure return. He pulls back again. You feel abandoned all over again. You chase harder in response. And suddenly, you're right back where you started, caught in the same painful loop. So really, your commitment in all of this isn't actually to him, it's to yourself. It's a commitment to staying grounded in your own fullness, no matter what he decides to do or how he chooses to respond. That's really the only way any of this genuinely works. And if, after all of that, it still doesn't work out, if you stay full and he still doesn't step up to meet you, then you'll know, with real certainty, that he simply isn't your person. It won't be because you did something wrong along the way. It will simply mean that he wasn't ready, or he wasn't capable, or the two of you just weren't ultimately compatible. And that kind of clarity, painful as it might feel in the moment, is actually a gift. It's what allows you to finally stop waiting, stop hoping, stop pouring yourself into someone who was never able to pour back into you in return. It frees you up to eventually find someone who can genuinely meet you where you are. I also want you to hear this next part clearly, because it's easy to miss in the middle of all this talk about patience and staying grounded. None of this means you owe an avoidant man endless chances. Staying full is not the same thing as staying forever. There's a real difference between giving someone reasonable time to show you who they are and quietly accepting a slow, indefinite holding pattern that never actually moves anywhere. You're allowed to have a timeline. You're allowed to decide at some point that enough time has passed without meaningful change, and that it's okay to walk away, even if he's a genuinely good person, even if there were real moments of connection between the two of you. Compatibility isn't only about chemistry. It's about whether two people are actually capable right now of building something steady together. It also helps to remember that staying full isn't a performance you put on exclusively for his benefit, hoping it will produce a certain reaction out of him. If you're only doing it as a means to an end, as a clever way to get him to chase you or open up faster, some part of you will still be anxiously waiting for the payoff, and that anxiety will leak through no matter how composed you try to appear on the surface. The real shift happens when staying full becomes something you're doing for yourself first, because it genuinely feels better to live that way, because you like who you are when you're not consumed by checking your phone or replaying his last message over and over. The relationship outcome becomes secondary to the quality of life you're actually building for yourself. It's also worth saying that this isn't only relevant to brand new relationships. These same patterns show up in long-term relationships and marriages too. An avoidant partner you've been with for years can still benefit from this same shift, and so can you. Sometimes people settle into years of quiet distance without ever really naming what's happening, without realizing that the anxious avoidance cycle has just quietly become the normal rhythm of the relationship. It's never too late to recognize the pattern and start doing things differently, even after a long stretch of doing them the old way. And one more thing before we close this out. Healing your own anxious patterns doesn't mean becoming cold or detached or pretending you don't care. That would just be trading one defense mechanism for another. The goal was never to stop caring or to numb yourself out. The goal is to care from a place of security instead of fear, to love someone without losing yourself in the process, to want connection without needing it in a way that costs you your own identity. That's what real emotional maturity looks like on both sides of a relationship, and honestly, it's worth working toward no matter who you end up with. So, let me leave you with this before we go. You are not too much. Your longing for real connection is not some character flaw you need to fix. Your need for consistency is not unreasonable or excessive. You don't have to shrink yourself down to become lovable. You don't have to play games or pretend to be someone else just to be desired. All you truly need is to find someone who is genuinely ready to receive what you're offering, someone who sees your warmth as the gift that it actually is, rather than something to be afraid of, someone who chooses to move towards you, not away from you. And in the meantime, the very best thing you can do for yourself is exactly what we've talked about today. Stay full. Build a life that you genuinely love living. Become the kind of person you'd actually want to be with yourself. And trust fully that the right person will eventually recognize your worth, without you ever having to convince them of it.